Okay, are we gonna start?
Yep.
Okay. My name's Jordan Cannon, and I'm here to talk about a book that I wrote. It's called 8 Faces of the Goddess. I have a pseudonym, Saeed Ahmad Hatef Esfahani. I can talk about that, I guess, in a little bit. But the main reason why I wrote the book, or I should say what motivated me to read it or to write it, was I was reflecting on cannabis use and how it affected me, and I noticed that there were certain different frames of mind I would get in from the use, and they were all different, but they all seemed to kind of balance themselves out some way. I had finished writing the book, and then I realized that all of the faces, or these aspects of being, they were the same as these things called Sephiroth in the Kabbalah, and it's basically the same thing. It's basically these different ways your mind is oriented, and when you read tarot, if I jump around too much, let me know.
Okay.
But when you read tarot, you frame it on, you've got this higher level of mind that kind of sees things from a third person, that kind of understands yourself as a human being. And you've got this other layer of self, which is an emotional part. And you've got this other self that deals with how you interact with your world and with other people. So the faces are the extremes on both ends. One is self-focused, and the other is other-focused. That captures 6 of the faces, and I can talk about those individually. 2 of the faces, which would represent the sun and the moon, are what happens when those things are balanced. So the first face that we can talk about is inactivity, and that, haha, right, you just lie around. And people think that that's a bad thing, that you smoke marijuana and you become lazy. But almost all traditions have a rest component to how they have people live lives. I mean, the day of rest for Christians or Jews or whoever else. So there is something that seems to be important across belief systems about a resting state. The reason why I guess I'm going to argue that this exists, or this is prioritized or valued by different religions, is that we need time to stop and really reflect on what's going on. That's why it's related to the moon, because the moon goes full, it goes new, it goes and comes, and that's how things in life are. Phases of not just our lives, but phases of the year. It's summer here, so we're in a phase of growing. So we could focus our mind on growing. Maybe I'll start with the top 2, objectivity and longevity. And this is that higher mind where, on one hand, you understand yourself as human, and that some things from experience that you just shouldn't mess with, whether it be alcohol or drugs or whatever. It's very individualized to your experiences in life. Now that's balanced with that objectivity of looking at yourself objectively, is balanced with really seeing or viewing things that come into your life as a blessing or luck or being fortunate. I mean, we can look around here and think how fortunate we are. We're in a safe spot. It's beautiful. So these are 2 extreme, I guess, ways of viewing things that I experienced when smoking cannabis. And this is very much in Kabbalah this is kind of where spirituality is found. Viewing yourself almost as if you are a human, but it's weird. Like, how can you do that? How can you view yourself third person? But this is this is a way to do it. I don't want to rewrite the Kabbalah, but this is definitely my experience of the tree of life, brought about from probably smoking too much cannabis. The level below that, where the emotional mind is at, on one hand you've got festivity, where you want to share what you have, whether it be wealth or information. Usually it's from experiencing life yourself, from experiencing the ups and downs and knowing how to help people get through those ups and downs. The Hasidic Jews practice this. It's called Hesed for Jewish people, but I called it festivity. That is going to be balanced with veracity or aggressiveness, which might sound bad, but there's a point in time for that when it's appropriate. If someone that you care about calls you a bad name and you get your feelings hurt, that's a natural experience, and it was brought about by someone maybe insulting you in some way. So those two extremes of emotion are balanced out right in the middle, and this is the sun in astrology. For me, it was collectivity, where I think I understood in balancing all these things that I should be or should do, or ways I was being pulled, that everyone else is experiencing the same thing, that everyone else is having this life experience of, do I serve myself or do I serve others? And there's no right or wrong there. It's all relative to the experience or the situation, or at least I would argue that. Below that, and the very, I don't want to say basic, but the part of your mind that is focused on the mundane, the everyday, interacting with people, and interacting with material, both crafting it and enjoying it. On one hand, you've got creativity, where you're driven to learn and to take what you learn and make something out of it, to craft your world in somehow, whether it be through writing or farming or whatever. That's a part of our brain that has that self-driven focus to learn. That's balanced with sensitivity, where you're aware of the importance not just of other people and satisfying their wants and needs, having relationships, but also in interacting and enjoying with our five senses. So obviously eating and all those different things. And to understand the inactivity, which is the moon, which sits in between these two, is to know, or I guess is to reflect upon, at any point in time in my life right now, who's in there and what's in there, and knowing that everything is temporary. And this is probably one of the harder ones for people. When people smoke weed and they don't want to, they say, oh, I don't like smoking weed because it makes me feel nervous or jittery. I guess I'm making the argument that what they're pushing away are these different ways their mind is working that's uncomfortable, because some people don't want to look at themselves as a third person, to look themselves in the mirror and say, okay, what am I doing? Am I caring for not just myself but other people? But also, am I balancing out the way any other person would, or are my decisions, would I think that someone else in my situation making this decision would be in the right for making that certain decision? Whenever someone talks about the tree of life, it eventually goes to a concept called the middle pillar, which is essentially balance, like a fancy way of putting it, where the sun, which would be collectivity, and the moon, which would be inactivity, when they line up, there's like a path to God in theory, right? But one thing that people don't seem to incorporate, and this is where we might get a little conspiratorial, is that there are folks who join certain groups and go through certain initiation rites, and they all interact with the void or death. They do that so they can understand and comprehend everything. So it's this kind of duality of everything and nothing. So if you want to be able to be in touch with everything, the first thing you have to do is conceive of nothingness. But that, I guess, leads us on to the second reason, or the second thing I would like to achieve with this book, is to bring attention to five different types of people that join any group and they ended up fucking it up somehow. And I think the purpose is to fuck it up. The reason why I say that is because these 5 types of people all interact with the void, the death. So whenever they join a group, they know that that group is on its way out, whether it be Black Lives Matter or LGBTQ or any type of group. There's no group that's held out indefinitely. So to pair with the book, I've developed 5 tarot cards. And you can go to the website, southsidetarot.com, and they're there for anyone to look at, for anyone to design cards and use them in their own decks. So I'm not necessarily wanting any money from them. I would like people to use them, because when they do, they're going to start becoming aware. Well, I guess recognizing awareness. So when I read someone's tarot and I start saying what's in the cards and they have a reaction, say, oh, how did you know that? Well, an explanation for it is that there are certain circumstances, frames of mind that we all understand. We don't necessarily have to say we understand them, but we do. You know, if I say having a girlfriend, you might know what that experience is like, and others would too. So there's a relatability there of there's certain things that we just instinctually know as part of being human. The avoidance of death, or the fear of discussing death or the end of things, I mean, there's a reason why we avoid it, because it's scary. But I guess I should talk about each group individually that I'm referring to here. So first of all, whenever there is a movement, you're going to have people who are bandwagon people. So that might be the first. And most people know what bandwagon means.
Yeah, people that are just going to jump on the bandwagon.
Something's popular, let's all join it. It's wanting acceptance. Maybe they don't even really understand the whatever it is, but they're going to jump on board until it leads to them being unaccepted because that group is out of fashion. So, for example, I mean, I'm going to use present groups as examples, not to insult them or to demean them, but to just, this is what they are. So Black Lives Matter in the past year and a half have become a very popular group. One thing that maybe members of them and other people, they don't want to realize that some people who join that are just doing it because it's popular. They don't really give a shit about Black lives. They're doing it because it's a popular thing to do. It's a nice little sign to put in front of your house, and there's this feeling of acceptance there. Now, at another level, the second group are people that see a way to profit from it. which sounds like harmless, but so after 9/11, nationalism went up. Everybody was waving the American flag. And you have folks like Alex Jones come out and really talk about liberty and freedom in America, and there's people coming to get us. Which sounds good, right? It sounds like he's motivated and he's, feeling the passion of it. But the thing people seem to not talk about is he's making money. He's selling, out of one side of his mouth, he'll say, we can't let these globalists take over our food supply because they're going to have us eating powdered bugs and, drinking milkshakes. Then out of the other side of his mouth, he'll say, well, we've got this great protein powder that you need to buy, and it's on sale, and the sale is only going to last. So in theory, or I guess one way of looking at it is, he knew that there was going to be a wave of pro-America. So he thought, okay, I can make some money doing this. And maybe I'm wrong, but we know there are people like this. They see something coming up and like, oh, I can make some money off of this. And I don't really give a shit about the underlying ideology behind it. I can make money here. A third group, and all of these 5 groups are all different types of Illuminati, if Illuminati is a thing, right? If it is a thing, these 5 people would occupy that group. The third is folks that they want to lead the bandwagon. So social justice, right? That's been really popular the past couple of years. They know what to say to the crowd, but what they really care most about is themselves. But it's different than the second group because, okay, so AOC, the congresswoman, right? The Green New Deal, everything on the surface would seem that she is a woman of color who is for people of color and the climate and everything. But when you really look into this Green New Deal, there's a big chunk of that devoted to something called smart cities, or doing things based on technology or on science, because science is kind of the ruling religion of the day, it seems like. Well, the problem is almost everything, well, I shouldn't say everything, but if you read through what they have in mind for cities with the Green New Deal, and you read through what a concentration camp was, they're similar in that the approach was, I know what will get us out of this, science. Science will get us out of this. So I guess what I'm saying is the third group, Marjorie Green down in Georgia, she's another one of these, and Kaepernick probably as well, the football player. They want to lead the bandwagon, and but they're drawing the conclusions, and the conclusions oftentimes leads to the group the crowd, into messing them up or hurting them or harming them in some way. Marjorie Green down in Georgia, talking about whatever it is she talks about with liberty and QAnon and everything. She knows that there's people who are aware that there might be something going on, so she's jumping on and maybe seeing that she can get something out of this, and not necessarily really caring about the people who are her constituency. I better move on because I'll probably get in trouble for that one. The fourth group, and this one is probably more of a hot button one. These are the folks that have so much power and authority that they engage in really perverted sexual shit because they can. I know it shouldn't be that simple, but I think that it might be. The pedophiles, the Epsteins, all those folks, they get so much, it's almost like they have contempt and they just want to do the debaucherous, horrible things because they know that they can get away with it. I mean, and they do, right? I mean, Bill Clinton's still out. There's no like ruling person that's been alleged to do these things, it really has had to pay the piper because there's a network, right? And the fifth group, or the fifth type of people that are going to join any group, are the people that want to lead it. Like, they want to be leaders because they want to be leaders. Like, it's not so much they want to lead that group, but they want to be in charge. And of these five, there may be someone could be in the first and second and third group, whatever, but they all interact because they've had part of the initiation experiences they have is to have a torturous, almost out-of-body experience that gives them selfishness to a destructive degree. Because if you think about it, if someone holds you down and, you know, does something horrible to you, and we've heard the stories, who knows if they're true, but let's say that someone is taken and they run the train or whatever, they're going to go in a place in their mind that is purely on survival. So they connect with basic human animal mentality of life, living life. So all these five that come back with this experience of life did it with meeting death kind of face to face. So what I would like to see happen, since I guess I'm saying I believe that these types of people exist in all groups, and I mean all groups, from the libertarians. I mean, I can't say that it's just the groups I don't like. It's all of them, because people will find a way into it. Because if you're carried up in a passionate thing for some reason that you believe in, people can use that against you. And this is where objectivity comes in. You know, one of the faces is knowing that people will use what you like against you, or they can, unless you're aware of these things. So what I did was I mailed copies of my book all over the world and all over the United States. And what I hope to see happen is one person, I'm thinking female, just because they will be the less likely to be shot and arrested. But I'd like to see, in every place that I mailed the book, 8 women gather and say, you know what, we are each going to represent one of these faces. What they really mean is we're going to represent these aspects of being human that we've kind of forgotten about or lost. And they make a declaration of sovereignty. So if 8 women in Hong Kong or London go out into a public place and say, we're sovereign, there's no state that rules over us, there's no ruling entity at all that rules over us, we are our own thing. Now, if that happens here in New Hampshire, given the political climate regarding white males, I mean, you know, if 8 white males did this, they'd all be shot or arrested or called racist or terrorists or whatever, right? So for whatever reason right now in history, that doesn't seem like it would work. It just wouldn't, because right now there is the divine feminine as part of the book of voluntarists saying, you know what, there's a sovereign nation over here, there's a sovereign nation over here, and there's a sovereign group over here that is new and has potential, but it's really nothing yet. So I'm going to voluntarily leave where I'm at now and go and work with them. And it's not that they're being worshipped, but they are definitely leading that group. So, I mean, we all know how viruses spread now because of, the fun thing we've had to do in the past 2 years. So we understand the concept of taking something that has the ability to spread and spreading it all over. So what I'd like to see is that each little seed, 8 women declare sovereignty, which is basically a declaration of independence. And it's funny, when people declare independence, no one can really stop them. People can validate it or not, or follow along with them or not. But when people declared independence in this country, they just did it, and we celebrate it. So it's almost like the most American thing we can possibly do is to voluntarily leave whatever has happened to America, and not just here, and all the other countries as well, with the medical tyranny. And there's plenty of people talking about that. It's almost common, it's just common to talk about now that criminals are running the show. So this is a way to have people leave the show, join a new show, in a non-violent way, because ultimately, I don't want to arm people around the world, because that wouldn't work anyway. But I do want them to not only come to terms with the faces in the book, but also the concepts that I'm maybe trying to remind people about in the tarot cards. And that's pretty much it. But feel free to ask any questions.
All right. We'll have some questions about your book.
Yeah, go ahead.
So what inspired you to write it?
I had written a lot. I went to graduate school and wrote, and writing was a part of all the jobs that I've had. So it was almost that, okay, Jordan, sit down, read a book, or write a book, and just get it over with. So I sat down and smoked a lot of weed over about 3 or 4 days, and just vomited this out on the computer screen. And then here we are. So that was a big, just to write it, but also I think to share my message that cannabis really is. I mean, cannabis is at the heart of all this. And any group of 8 women, like, they know that cannabis probably should be part of it. And being comfortable being human again, because prior to really taking on cannabis or bringing it into my life, I was #1 statist. I had my master's in criminal justice. I worked for a variety of state agencies. Had my hair cut short. I didn't look anything like I do now. And I thought America great and government great. And it was only from working in government and seeing how these 5 groups, because I worked more in law enforcement, so police, corrections, these 5 types of people infect all of those types of organizations. So people can say all they want about cops being heroes, or people in government being good servants. Maybe it's true for most people, but what they can't seem to realize is, as you give government more and more and more authority and more power, these 5 types of folks are going to be drawn to that for their own personal gain, for their own personal interests. So I think to really upset the apple cart a little bit in that way was a big motivation behind it.
All right. Yeah. So when you say you worked in law enforcement, what did you do in law enforcement?
So I worked as a therapist in a prison, and that was one job. So I didn't have like arrest powers or anything, but I worked in a prison, and I saw how they're just modern day concentration camps, and we're trying to say that they're not, but
in reality, that's exactly what they are.
Well, okay, so some guys that would come into my group, when they would leave therapy, they would go to their job and they would make 20-something cents an hour or whatever. And that was just it, and they're, oh, well, you're saving money and blah, 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 blah. But this is basically saved labor, to make license plates, to make bulletin boards for softball games. Yeah, that's what it is. They're concentration camps that we're trying to say, well, God wants us to punish wrongdoers or whatever nonsense that we're trying to justify it with.
How long have you been smoking cannabis for?
So I didn't start cannabis until this was when I was out at the job I just mentioned. This was probably when I was about 32, maybe. I want to say maybe around 32. And I was living in Washington State, and it was legal there. And I think I had some cannabis. I don't know how I got it, and I made cookies for the first time. I thought this will be fun, and so of course I eat them all as you do.
Ooh.
And you just lay on the ground as you do, right? And the person I was with was like, "Are you okay? Because you're basically doing this for a couple hours." It seemed like just time's flashing by. And as horrible as that sounds, that type of experience, the mega stoned stupor that, you know, the cool kids don't want, that's, I think, you know, inactivity.
I think it's mind-opening.
That's necessary to really understand what's going on. I mean, this is the meditation stuff that yogis and things talk about. You got to have stillness. You got to stop, and it's too easy with modern technology to not stop, just to keep going. You know. So yeah, I think about 32.
All right. And once you started smoking cannabis, do you think that you started to see the world differently?
You know, part of it is really reflecting on who you are, and that is from speaking with people who don't do cannabis, who aren't comfortable with it. That seems to be what they are trying to avoid, this kind of higher mind. And maybe the atheists, it's the atheists that I know that really fit that category. They don't want to view things as a blessing or luck. They don't want to view themselves unselfishly, like, okay, Jordan, be on, look yourself in the mirror. This and this thing are not good for you. Like, that's a really uncomfortable realization and thoughts to have. But it's, for me, part of the cannabis experience of smoking weed and being forced to look at yourself and say, okay, who are you really, and what are you doing with your life? And I think that's what brought about the change in me, and what I hope to bring about the change in the whole world, honestly, because I'm not for legalization. I'm for, it should never have been made a crime in the first place. Like anything that made it a crime, that paper just needs to be burned down, along with, you know, anything that's representing cannabis being other than just a plant that can bring about certain, you know,
mindsets.
Yeah, different ways of thinking, I guess.
Yeah. I will definitely say from personal experience, I have had some of the best conversations after smoking cannabis. And you know, that's one thing that I personally like about it, is that, you know, if you get two people that smoke cannabis and are comfortable with each other, you guys can have an amazing conversation that maybe you say some stuff that you would be comfortable if you were saying, and, you know, your sober mindset, you know, you get what I mean?
Oh yeah. Well, I think one of the big reasons why it's illegal, especially in lots of different countries. I mean, it's technically illegal here in the United States, but I mean, come on. First of all, around the world, regardless of whatever government's going on, the wealthy folks who have attorneys, they never stopped smoking weed. So it's not like weed was ever really illegal for them. But smoking cannabis regularly and really adopting it as part of your lifestyle, it makes it too easy to throw away symbolic things that you love, because you see them as just things, and that is how we are ruled, in a sense. I mean, I'm not telling people to burn crosses or burn American flags or whatever, but those 5 groups of people are going to grab the symbols that have meaning and stand behind them. So any of the symbols that we cherish are going to be used and abused by people who are just fake and phony. So cannabis, for me, made me think, all right, what things do I value or love? Atlanta Falcons football, whatever, right? Even, you know, aspects of being Southern. You know, these are all experiences and just little pieces of an experience that I've had. But really, if I'm stoned enough, right, it's like, who cares? If I'm alive, I'm around people that are nice and friendly, and I'm having a positive human experience with other people, then who gives a shit about any of that other stuff? And if people wake up to that, then we won't have governments. We won't have states, because people will know that the Bidens and the Macrons and all leaders around the world are a bunch of snaky fuckers, basically, that have just, okay, American flag, people like this, wave it, woo, Like, that's how you get elected. So if cannabis reclaims the world, then the nation states are just going to fade away, I think, or at least that's what I hope happens. And this is a little nudge to maybe help it happen.
All right. Where can people get this book at?
So if you go to my website, again, southsidetarot.com, you can find it there. You can go on Amazon. Again, it's 8 Faces of the Goddess, Cannabis and the Divine Feminine. Can I talk about this real quick? This is kind of dark shit, but I can still talk. Like, okay, so last year during the lockdown and everything, I finally broke down and got one of those 23andMe's DNA thing, because I never knew who my dad was. And I did it, and it came back, and it turns out I'm like half Iranian, which is some crazy shit, right? Well, what was really crazy about it is it was saying, oh, well, your father's people are from Western Kazakhstan and all this stuff. Well, I had already lived in Kazakhstan in the Peace Corps, in the very area that it said that my family was from. And hello, I mean, I raised and live in a yurt, for God's sake. So it seemed like when I got this information, like I was already doing it, like it wasn't like a big shocker. So I looked and saw that there was a certain area of Iran where his people were from, and it was called Esfahan. Esfahan, what they say there is Esfahan is half the world. So the whole ethos of the city is about balancing two, maybe in the midst of two opposing halves, which is really what the Kabbalah is. The collectivity, inactivity, middle pillar, balancing of all these different things is what this is. But the really fucked up thing about it is that the only information I have about my biological father is that he put a gun to my mom's head and raped her. And that's how I was conceived. So that's like maybe a way of forgiving him or forgiving that line or whatever, right? But I had to pick that name. The person, Saeed Esfahani, was a poet like 300 years ago, like a mystic type of guy who talked about balance. So I thought, okay, this works. But I definitely wanted to include that component because there's a lot of maybe healing behind the book on a personal level that maybe can, the whole world can maybe feed off of and heal themselves with a little bit.
All right. How many copies of your book are there?
How many copies?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, this is published through Liberty Under Attack Publications, right? So that's the main publisher. I mean, I had printed some off at Staples, but I knew that I had to go through a publisher and do the whole Amazon, and bookstores can order it. So I've put it in bookstores in the general Keene area, but like I said, I've mailed it all over. I've probably mailed it to a couple dozen cities around the world. I can't remember the ones off the top of my head, but they're...
So it's all over the place.
Yeah. There right now, this book is going to be delivered in a bookstore in, like, let's say Hong Kong, because Hong Kong is one of them. I don't mean to piss off the Chinese, but I kind of want to. So someone's going to get it, and hopefully if they speak English, they'll read it. And then if they come across this talk we're having and they understand it, maybe they'll do something with it. So that's, that's the cannabis virus that I hope to spread around a little bit.
That would be amazing. All right. Well,
that's pretty much it, though.
That's it. Yeah. All right.